Hey there. All right, so we have now explained how the Jeremiah tree works, which is a tool for understanding the different layers of thought, automatic thoughts, intermediary beliefs, and core belief, and then the way that our actions, words affect our environment, affect our relationships, thus conditioning the soil in which we grow. By that meaning, they affect the circumstances in which we live, and that those circumstances also affect other people who live in them as well. And so we understand that model. And the first task of cognitive behavioral coaching is to explain that model to the client, explaining that it's not what happens to you, but how you respond to what happens to you that creates your emotions. It's not invalidating the things that happen to you are difficult or painful or whatever, but that you different responses to those things, different orientations to those events will change the way that you come out of them. And so it's worth looking at if your thoughts are helpful or even if they're true. And so the next step is to teach them how to isolate their thoughts, how to take them captive and check them to see if they are consistent with their goals, values, and beliefs. If they are, wonderful, we don't need to change anything. If their thoughts are not serving them, not helping them reach their goals, not helping them live out their values, not reflective of their beliefs, then we might want to consider changing them. Okay? But we're not to changing the thoughts yet. We're just to the step of asking them to begin thinking about their thinking now that they understand the different layers of thought. And so the way that we do this is we explain that the normal order in which these things happen is that there's an activating event, some people call it a trigger, and then there's an automatic thought, which is the interpretation of that event. And then from the automatic thought come their emotion, their behavior, and their physiological response. Okay? But that's not how they will experience it in the beginning. Normally, the way that people experience it is there's an activating event, and then they notice that their emotions shift. They don't think about their automatic thought. They just notice they were feeling fine, and then something happened, and then they felt mad, sad, hurt, jealous, whatever. Okay? So the skill that they've got to learn is to go back and ask themselves, okay, after my emotion shifted, what did I think right before my emotion shifted? So I was fine. I was going along in my normal state. Something happened. My emotion shifted. What did I think right before that shift? Okay. And then from there to note, okay, this is what I thought. And then what did I do? What did my body do, which is the physiological response? And what did I feel emotionally? Okay, and that's all we're going to try and get them to do in this first skill. So I've got an example of this. You were waiting, coach says, you on page 105, coach says you were waiting for the light to change so you could cross the street and feeling how you normally feel. Is that right? Client says yes. Coach says, at what point did you notice there was a change in the way you were feeling? Client says, I looked up and saw the shop I got sacked from or fired from, and that's when I got angry. Coach says, okay, what do you remember thinking right before you became angry? Client says, I thought, it isn't fair. And so we see it's not that the client saw the shop and that somehow seeing the shop made them feel a certain way. It's that they had certain experience at that shop and they had framed it a particular way, which is that it isn't fair. Now, they could have just as easily framed it as, I'm sure glad I'm not working there anymore, or even, I've learned lessons from working there, and being fired from that shop is just a part of my journey. Or it could be any number of ways that they want to reframe that. But it's the thought, it isn't fair, that created their anger, okay? If they'd had a different way of thinking about it, they wouldn't feel angry, they would feel something different. Okay, so that is an example of how this works. Now notice, we are trying to get them to isolate really like a 1 or 2 second moment in time. And that can be really difficult for some clients. You'll tell, and the other thing that's often difficult is you'll say, tell me what you thought right before they felt that way, and they'll give you another emotion. Or you ask them, tell me what you were feeling, and they'll give you a thought. So you may have to correct them and say, okay, that's not a thought, that's an emotion, or that's not an emotion, that's a thought. And try and really get them to give you an emotion and a thought that go together, okay? And then after they thought the thought and they had the emotion, what was the behavior and what did your body do? Did you feel sick to your stomach? Were you nervous? Did your knees go weak? Did you start sweating? Did you cry? You know, what was it that your body did that you didn't tell it to do? And some people won't be able to identify a physiological response because they're not looking for one. Once they become aware of physiological responses, and they've done this a couple times, they might be more aware of it and be able to give you a physiological response. But I wouldn't get hung up on the fact that there has to be one or anything like that. The other thing I wouldn't get hung up on is, did they have the thought before the emotion or after the emotion? That's a big, has been a matter of debate between people who subscribe to dialectical behavior therapy versus those who subscribe to cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy says you have to have the thought, then the emotion comes from the thought. Dialectical behavior therapy says that sometimes people have a conditioned response. So, there perhaps has been some repetitive trauma or something like that. And so as soon as the activating event happens, they have the emotion and the thoughts come later. It doesn't really matter for our purposes. There's going to be an emotion. There's going to be some thinking around it that supports that emotional response. And then there's going to be a behavior and a physiological response that go with it too. And so if you can just identify the thought that goes with the emotion, and that thought winds up being either not true or not helpful, then we have something to work with. And that's really all we need from this. And we also need for our clients to be able to identify the way that their thoughts go with their emotions and to be able to see the connection there. All right. So if you go to Life Care exercise number 6, you'll see that there's a little, go to page 110. There's some capturing thoughts exercises there. So when it comes time to do this exercise, you're going to ask them to try and capture 3 automatic thoughts. So I usually try and do 1 in the session in order to just get them used to the exercise. And then the homework I usually give is, between now and the next time we meet, see if you can bring me 3 automatic thoughts that occur to you, or 3, examples of when you got triggered, you had an automatic thought, an emotion, a behavior, and a physiological response. You'll notice physiological response isn't on there. And I'll talk more about this when it comes time to give you the exercise, but you can have them write that in if you'd like to. I guess when I was creating this manual, I didn't want to bog people down with too much, but I do think it's helpful to note the physiological response if they can identify one. Okay, so that is the first skill of cognitive behavioral coaching. And in the next video, I want to teach you how to help a client go deeper with their thinking. So to identify the automatic thought that they want to work with, but then to follow that thought down the tree, so to speak, into their intermediary beliefs and into their core belief, to see if it's connected. It might not be. It might not be that there's anything, pathological, anything unhealthy in the intermediary beliefs or the core belief that give rise to that particular automatic thought. And there's a way to notice if there is a connection or there isn't. There will probably be a connection, but whether it's an unhealthy connection or not, you'll be able to check and see. But we will go into that in the next video. For now, this is just the way to help clients understand cognitive behavioral coaching, the theory of it, and how to capture an automatic thought. And we'll go deeper together in the next video. So I look forward to seeing you there.